welcome to More Than Footy, brought to you by Bingley. I'm Hayley Faulkner.
And I'm Tom Chadwick. Great to have your company. Hales, a narrow loss to the Brisbane Lions on Sunday. The boys were really brave. We had 2 men down for most of the game when it was really warm in Brisbane, so they were really brave, but just fell short, and we look ahead to the Bulldogs this Sunday.
It'll be a tough challenge against the Western Bulldogs, who have had some good form and showed some tough fight this year.
Now we're decked out in, as we always are at this podcast, we are decked out in Nike.
Yeah, for those
today.
who are listening, we're decked out in Nike. Those who can't see us, but for those who can, you can clearly see we are head to toe in Nike, and that is because we are joined by the Nike Pacific Vice President and General Manager, Ashley Reade. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and you both look very on brand.
Thank you very much, mate. Now, you've just come from a chat in the boardroom at the Sydney Swans HQ. Firstly, what do you make of the facilities, and what were you doing here today?
It was just great to be able to be invited in from Tom. We had like a CEO forum, so it was basically all the premium partners in here today, and an incredible just behind the scenes and just Chatham House rules around the year of what the Swans have been, what the performance is to date, what the expectations are going forward, and some great insight as well. It's always inspiring to be around great coaches, and you think about what John Longmire's been able to achieve over a long period of time too. Hearing from Scott from the W program as well was really inspiring. So great to be here. I spent a lot of time here at HQ over the journey too. I mean, the Swans HQ is an incredible facility, and I've been to a lot of facilities of sport around the world, but this is certainly benchmark when you think about what it's been able to achieve. And I just think how the thoughtfulness around what it's been able to achieve from a diversity point of view. I mean, the women's space is smaller than the men's, but per square metre, it's the same. Mm. So it's been very thoughtful around that. And you think about the recovery spaces as well and what it means in terms of altitude training, and I think the connection between staff and the playing group as well. Everything's been very thoughtful. And again, the culture here, you can feel that when you're here as well. It's an intangible thing. You can kind of feel it around the HQ here as well.
We certainly pride ourselves of being one club, everyone under the one roof. How do we compare to the other facilities? Do other clubs and facilities have that similar sort of one club feel around the world that you've been to?
Yeah, I think I draw a lot of parallels from business and sport as well. I think everyone's after being able to be involved and lead one team cross-functionally and make everyone does like functional excellence. You take backs, forwards and mids. They're obviously one team, be a part of a broader picture too. Everyone wants to achieve that, but I think here you can visibly see that in terms of the decisions that have been made as well. I haven't seen anything to this level before in terms of what that looks and feels like and how purposeful things have been done as well. I just see the general, happiness and health of the team as well around. It's a pretty inspiring place to be.
Now, of course, you're in a footy club, but before we talk about your career at Nike, you played footy at a pretty handy level back in the day. Tell us about your footy career.
I grew up playing a lot of footy as well, a little bit of time on a list at St Kilda and Melbourne for a while, but under 19s and reserves, then went across to Norwood for a couple of years as well. That was a really proud club. That was incredible. Playing in the SANFL was probably where my last few years were as well. And just playing there, a lot of Melburnians over there as well. I lived with Dale Fleming, who had some time at Hawthorn and Fitzroy, Matty Primus. So Dale and I were finishing our careers, going to SANFL. Matty was obviously starting out, so still great mates to this day. Also met a guy there who ended up being a dual premiership captain for Geelong. Young, scrawny Adelaide kid called Tom Harley. You guys might have heard of him as well. But that's going back 30 years. So obviously, Tom and my connection back to that point, like those, I still see a lot of those guys today. So, great friendships.
Why'd you hang up the boots?
I wasn't very good. And
I reckon you would have been. You've got the height, you've got the build.
It's an incredible game to play. I just think and the connections you've made through sport over that journey as well was unbelievable. But at some point too, that's probably enough. I went back to Sydney and played at Balmain for a little bit as well, where we won a premiership there, which was the first one in 98 years. That was some celebration. But I think being involved in sport, particularly and within AFL circles too, it was an incredible place to be.
Are you a Swans fan? I mean, like you said, you've been here a lot. You've spent time here. Are you a bona fide Swans fan?
Yeah, I grown up as a Melbourne supporter, so a pretty passionate D supporter over the journey. When you're born into those sort of circles, you can't remember a time when you weren't. It's kind of where the family history is. But I certainly have a lot of when you're watching a Swans game and when you start to understand too the players in terms of that who are Nike athletes as well. If you take an Errol or an Isaac or a Brody, and you have a look at the way they play on the men's program and now in the women's program as well, and take a Chloe Malloy, like some of the most inspiring athletes I think we have are in red and white too. So you certainly become a fan very quickly.
It was a great way to move into your career at Nike. You've been there 20 years. Tell us about your journey from 20 years ago to currently in your incredible position that you're in now.
Yeah, so I started in 2004, and some of those things too, like I've always found you have, change brings obviously, freshness and newness as well. I think being 20 years sounds like a very long time, and it certainly is, but I feel like you think about the culture of what's been created at Sydney, that keeps people here and the longevity of people being here and the want to be able to come to here as well. Similarly to Nike as well. I mean, we're about inspiration and innovation, and you're working in those environments and the culture's so great that allows you to stay and wants you to stay there longer. I also think having a chance, I've had 7 roles over that journey as well, starting off in the Australian office in Melbourne, which where Australia and New Zealand's run from, and then time in our Greater China office in Shanghai for 3 years with my young family at that time, with my wife and 3 kids, and then moving over to our world headquarters in a few different global roles. So those travels and experience over that journey. Now I've been back in Australia for 8 years as in running Australia and New Zealand. So all those we call critical experiences and different opportunities, working with incredible people, it's a pretty inspiring place to be. And I think if you're working within sport, as you both know as well, it's a pretty inspiring place to be when you think about what sport and the gift we work within and what that has the ability to really change lives. That's a pretty powerful place to be.
You've worked, as you said, with some incredible people and on some amazing projects. Can you tell us what potentially is one of the biggest highlights you've had in your 20 years at Nike, and maybe one of the biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think from a challenges point of view, it's always, if you get to a time of change around reorganisations and structures and things, that's always really hard. We're a flat structure, we're a connected team, a lot of love for each other as well. When those times come around, they're times of real challenge as well in how you're managing that level of change, and at some point you're losing some great teammates as well. That's the most difficult thing I've ever gone through, and actually how you're leading and managing that level of change. And the highlights are a ton. I mean, I think about, when you're at the sharpest level of sport and the highest level of sport through Olympics and World Cups, and have the privilege of being along the journey a lot of those occasions, that's been incredible. But I also think it's just like my biggest inspiration has been around managing high-performing teams and seeing some of those teammates as well have broader opportunities in being promoted in different roles and different levels of responsibility and moving abroad. I think as a leader, there's nothing more inspiring for yourself than having some of your teammates be able to coach, develop and lead, and then go off and do other things overseas. That for me is probably the greatest highlight I can reflect.
So I dare say it's a dynamic role, but what does a day in the life of your work day look like?
Yeah, and then this is why I think it's the best role in the company, because it's so different. Do you know, nothing's the same. Like today I'm here in Sydney, had a really inspiring connection, I said before, with John and Scott and Tom and the team, and then today obviously chatting with you guys is incredible. Heading back to Melbourne, there's obviously different gates and dates we work through in terms of what innovation we're bringing through here into Australia, how we connect with consumers, how we're inspiring the next generation of athletes. So that could be obviously through the recent World Cup and beyond, through the Matildas. We've got the Olympics on the horizon as well. So thinking about how we're showing up here, and that's a great platform for us to be able to showcase new innovation and new platforms as well. And there you'll see the incredible way we've actually developed air for athletes, and say, how do we now use air as a competitive advantage and performance innovation through the lens of an athlete as well. And so that's a pretty inspiring thing to be involved in. So no day is the same, and every day is a little bit different as well, and that keeps it really interesting.
One thing I love about Nike is how they get behind women's sport. The Matildas, we saw they really got behind the Matildas for their World Cup campaign, and I guess how important is it for brands like Nike and other brands to get behind women's sport?
Yeah, it's critical. And I think if you go back to the time I mentioned before about being in China, there's an old adage we used to say, it's like women hold up half the sky. And you think about from a consumer base as well, and I think if you go back to talking about high-performing teams, you have a high-performing team when you have diversity. Diversity from a gender point of view, from thought and from different perspective and experiences. And I also think the Matildas, that's an incredible place for us to be able to play as well. As a brand, we're not going to realise our potential. We don't have diversity in our portfolio of athletes and teams as well. And the World Cup was just an incredible experience. And one of those things, we've been with Matildas for 20 years. So the World Cup's not just jumping on board to go, let's make sure we can go there now. We've been on this long-term journey to be her greatest champion. And so that's been a thing we've been inspired by the most, is working hand in hand. And a lot of the Matildas athletes and Nike athletes, and the team obviously is a Nike partnership, which it means a ton to us. And the recent World Cup, if you're not inspired then, I don't know when you will be. And I think when we think about the World Cup, saying this next decade of sport is really in Australia. It was the World Cup last year, and it's Brisbane Olympics in 2032. And we think what's happened last year through the World Cup, how much they've inspired the next generation of athletes. There's some kid that would have been there looking at that and been so inspired. They'll talk about that on the podium in Brisbane in 32, about that moment, and that's that next generation coming through.
Speaking of moments, we were kind of spitballing in the media centre just before you came on about, in your role, some of the athletes, both male and female, you would have met along the journey. Is there any one time that you've met an athlete that you've been genuinely starstruck by?
Yeah, I'm just connecting back with Chloe Malloy today. Do you know what I mean?
Oh gosh, she doesn't need that, by the way.
Well, it's just, I talk about athletes too, and you go, an athlete where you gravitate towards has something about them too when you kind of see them on the field in terms of how they perform at different levels, how they work through adversity is always a great judgment, I think, as well. But also I love the kind of off the pitch as well, the humility and how they actually connect and interact. She's a great example of that, Chloe, I think, as well. Ariana Titmus, Arnie's another one of those two. She works incredibly hard. Again, has the talent, but works so incredibly hard. If you speak to her, it's just like she's one of the most incredible human beings as well on the planet. So that's what I love too, about how do you have this level of like fiercely in terms of competitive, in terms of what we want to get to, this level of humility and connection as well, which just separates them from other athletes.
Well, Chloe's certainly going to love hearing that. Ash, I know you're short for time today, so we really appreciate you sitting down and chatting with us, and it's been so interesting to hear your journey with Nike, and look forward to seeing what comes next.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on, mate.
Yeah, pleasure.